Okay, so we are live. This will be my second interview stream that I'm doing. My first one was with Dry Apologist on Catholicism from last week. This week we are with Ross here. We are going to be discussing his views and his positions on Reformed theology. So, Ross, if you could take a second and introduce yourself and kind of give us a little bit of a layout on what Reformed theology means to you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so my name's Ross Burns. I'm one of those annoying, irritating YouTube apologist kind of guys. So definitely check out my channel, Burns Eye View, if you have some time to kill or just enjoy following those irritating apologist kinds of guys. Also on Twitter and Facebook under the same name. Calvinism and Reformed theology in general is there's still some depth to it. I would be more on somewhere in the middle of this is complicated, but the Reformed Baptist or Calvinist side of that sort of things. But there is some diversity still within that. But generally Calvinism takes its name after, you guessed it, John Calvin. The teachings certainly go back before Calvin to some degree. Even people like Thomas Aquinas would hold a very similar view of predestination. Even going back to people like Augustine, you'd have some similar views of predestination. But the Calvinism and Reformed theology and all that sort of stuff, usually the hot button topics are things like predestination, free will, election, and those kinds of things. So I imagine that's probably what we're going to be getting into a little bit here today.
That's going to be a good bit of it. Now, I'm not that informed as far as Reformed theology goes, and that's one of the reasons I like having these conversations. Is it's a platform to give people the chance to actually tell what their beliefs are, so we can actually have a discussion about it, and there's not a straw man of it. We are actually discussing the strongest points that we can on a topic. So on that, would you consider your branch of Reformed theology to be a presuppositional proposition, such as some of the other precepts that kind of make their name known out in the internet circles?
Yeah, so generally the presuppositional thing isn't even defined by denomination or branch within Reformed theology. So like you'd have people in the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, the OPC Church, for example, who would be both. You'd have people like R.C. Sproul, who was an ardent critic of presuppositionalism and preferred more of the classical method of apologetics. Then you'd have plenty of people in the OPC Church who would love them some Van Til and some Greg Bonson and that sort of thing. So for me personally, even though you can find different opinions on presuppositionalism, I would lean towards it. I don't have a strong commitment, to the never-ending chain of how do you know, or like, JB, do you know for sure that you're not a brain in a vat? I don't know that those are the most profitable conversations all the time. So maybe I would be more along the lines of a John Frame kind of presuppositionalist than a Greg Bonson or a Seitan Bruggencate kind of guy. So I still enjoy the use of evidences sometimes, though not in the same way a classical or evidentialist apologist would.
Sorry, I was laughing at Steven in the chat. So you don't hold to presupposition as far as you go, but there are people inside the Reformed theology that hold to it. Now, do you hold to, this is another position because I've heard people talk about this, such as Sai, who's a presuppositionalist, who starts with that. And I don't want to spend this whole conversation talking about Sai, but just trying to lay some groundwork here. Do you believe in a literal 6-day creation and I'll say flat earth because it's actually expressly mentioned in the Bible, and an actual young earth to it, or do you hold more to the science view that actually says those things, can be taken as a genre text and that they're not to be taken literally, and that it doesn't do anything against the beliefs?
So I would actually kind of be principled. I have a principled ambiguity when it comes to that kind of thing. So on the one extreme, I don't see as more of an exegete than a scientist. I don't really see any reason to look at the first 2 chapters of Genesis, at the poetry and all the stuff going there, looking at what is the overall message of Genesis, what is the author trying to communicate to his original audience. I look at all that, and I don't think that what the original author was intending to communicate to second millennium BC Jewish people was the scientific age of the Earth or the universe. I don't think that's the main point of what he's getting at. I think I can kind of sympathize with the intentions of the Answers in Genesis kind of people wanting to give like a Christian response and a Christian position on scientific issues, but I don't see that is a necessary conclusion of the book of Genesis, that we have to say that the earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Now, on the other side, I also wouldn't be an ardent old earth or old universe creationist either. I don't see any reason why we would need to suppose that there have been about 14 billion years since the creation of the universe, and that God hasn't intervened at all since then. So I don't hold to a strict 6,000 year, literal interpretation of the first 2 chapters of Genesis, but I also don't think we need to presuppose naturalism when we're trying to do science either. So basically, I have no idea how old the Earth is. I have no idea how old the universe is. Principled ambiguity is my position.
Okay, and that's a fair position. Do you now? I didn't say this at the beginning, so I'm going to try to lay it out here, and I'm going to try to mention it several times. Ross is expressing the views of Ross and Ross only. He's not expressing the views of a Reformed Baptist church in general. So I like to put that out because people will try to tell you that you've misrepresented the church here and not. So do you in your theology and everything that I'm going to ask you, take it in base of your theology structure. So, evolution. Do you hold to evolution, or do you hold to? I don't even like using the word kinds the way it's used by some apologists because it's so ill-defined. But I guess you could hold to, a theistic evolution thing, to where things were set in motion through God's hand, and God kind of had a hand in it. So what's your kind of views on evolution?
So I certainly wouldn't. I think the debate at its core is whether we need to do methodological naturalism when we do science. In other words, do we need to presuppose that there is no divine intervention? It couldn't possibly be any supernatural intervention with the origin of the species or anything like that. With speciation, does it have to have a natural explanation? So I would certainly say no, because it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for me to say yes at that point while being reformed otherwise. So I wouldn't hold to Darwin's model on the origin of the species. So I wouldn't believe that necessarily there has to be a naturalistic explanation for the apparent design that we see, in how animals and humans behave. However, I would probably put myself more in the camp of the intelligent design folks. That's probably more what I would see. So I would, make arguments from DNA and all that kind of thing. It's not my field. It's not my area of expertise by any means. But so I would see a little bit more room for variation in that kind of thing. But I don't think Darwin's model of random mutation and natural selection, I don't think that's a sufficient model to explain how we got from bacteria to bankers, how we got from pond scum to philosophers. I don't think So no, I would not be a theistic evolutionist kind of person. But I'm also not, again, I'm also not a 6,000-year-old, necessarily a 6,000-year-old creationist kind of person. Though I'm willing to be persuaded either way.
Okay. So after my conversation with dry apologist, or during my conversation with dry apologist last week, he actually explained to me that he had a eternal conscience torment and annihilation theory debate with you on hell. So, do you still hold to eternal conscience torment, or has your position moved anywhere on that, or are you still do you still hold to that's your position and that's where you see it staying?
Yeah, so no, I'm definitely still on the eternal conscious torment side. Just, I mean, the name is so inviting and welcoming. So I just can't help myself. No, but yeah, I did have the debate with Caleb, the dry apologist, we've actually had two debates. So in that regard, I consider him my arch rival and my arch nemesis, despite him being actually a very nice person. And I've also actually had a debate with Chris Date, who's probably one of the more leading defenders of annihilationism on Adherent Apologetics channel. So he's very good at defending annihilationism. But no, I would still be, though my position has evolved slightly from that dry apologist debate, I've been a little bit more specific in that kind of thing. But no, I would still definitely hold to eternal conscious torment. And that would be the broad perspective within Reformed theology and Calvinism and Reformed Baptists and all that sort of thing. Though there are exceptions, again, like Chris Date, who is also Reformed in his understanding and his theology.
Okay. Now, let's see here, because I'm kind of trying to figure out where I want to go with this. Can you explain the theology behind the elect a little bit and how that works?
Yeah, so I mean that's a very complicated topic, but it's a good question. Like I mean, if you're going to jump into it, you might as well just jump into it like that. So,
well, I was going to go for the reprobate, but I figured we'd start with the elect just to make it a little bit softer.
Yeah, that works. That's definitely good. Yeah, so the theology of election, basically every Christian needs to have a theology of election because, I mean, it's right there in the New Testament. That God elects people to salvation. The question is just, what does that mean? And certainly there have been Christians over the years who have debated this subject. Augustine was probably in the 4th, 5th century, was the first one to really get that debate going, first one to really flesh out a theology of election and predestination. And just going on from that, there have been debates ever since. So it's certainly not a settled issue within Christendom. And it's difficult to say if there has been a majority position either way. But in the Reformation, starting with people like Luther and going through people like Zwingli and Calvin to the 3rd and 4th generations of the Reformers through today with Reformed Baptists and Presbyterians and that kind of thing, they would hold to a theory of election, rejecting things like, so the Arminian position would be more like God elects based on his foreknowledge. In other words, he just looks down the corridor of time, sees how people are going to respond to the gospel message, and says, okay, I'm going to choose the people who are going to respond to the gospel message in faith and repentance and that kind of thing. So that's election. So election is more a passive thing in that view. It's more like God is looking down and seeing who is, I don't want to say deserving of election, but who meets the requirements, meets the conditions of election, and then he picks them as his elect people, that sort of thing. So the other position, the one I would hold to, is the Reformed view, which would be more along the lines of, whereas the former one was passive election, the Reformed view is active election. So God decides that some people he is going to, in the course of time, he is going to bring from spiritual death to spiritual life. He's going to regenerate them and preserve them to the end. And those people who he pardons, kind of like a governor would pardon a criminal, those people are the elect. Those people are the ones he has grace on, he has mercy on. Not that there's anything in them that deserves it, not that there's anything more special about them, more righteous or more holy about them, but he decides out of his grace and his mercy, according to his own will, that he is going to save them and have mercy on them while passing over the others, those reprobates.
Now, from my understanding, according to Calvinist theology, you can't earn your salvation to heaven. It's given to you. It's predetermined. There's nothing you can do about it. There's no way to change it. Please correct me anywhere that I misspeak on this. Have you ever met anyone who's a Calvinist who believes that they are a reprobate and that there's nothing that they can do to change where they're headed, and that's just the way it is?
I've certainly seen some people who have believed in Calvinism and that kind of thing, and have really struggled with knowing, like, am I elect? Am I predestined? How do I know? How do I know? So I mean, I certainly haven't seen anybody who's a Calvinist and an atheist and that sort of thing. That would be kind of confusing. But I've certainly come across people who are just, the navel gazers. They're like, oh man, I don't know, that kind of thing. So probably the answer to the question within the question is, how do you know if you're elect or not? Like, how would we pastorally kind of respond to that sort of thing?
Yeah, because that's kind of it. Because, you could consider yourself elect today, and God has predetermined that you're not going to be elected 6 months from now, At least the way that I understand the way that the theology could work.
Yeah, so we would say that the election, God's election, happened in like eternity past. So there's debate on the order of things, but basically that God determined before he created any of us who he was going to have mercy on and who he was going to justly leave in their sin. And the number of elect, or as the Bible says, written in the book of life, is already predetermined. It's not going to change. So like, you won't be elect one day and then not be elect the next day.
But can you believe that you're elect today?
Oh, yeah,
and
certainly.
then understand that you're not elected tomorrow?
So probably the best way to answer that is to say that the way that we would know or have assurance that someone is elect or not is by the fruits of their life. So God regenerates only the elect. In other words, so God takes people from people who are in rebellion against God, who are sinning against him, and who enjoy their rebellion, all that kind of stuff. The way I was before I became a Christian, God takes those kinds of people and then changes them. So then they exhibit fruits of regeneration. So the fruits of the Spirit, like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. Those who formerly hated God now love God. They profess faith in Christ. They do good works. So they give all this evidence to say that, we're pretty confident that this person is elect. So it would be those evidences that would lead us to believe that the Spirit of God has regenerated this person from death to life, and the Spirit of God only regenerates the elect. And the way that we would, the final test would be endurance to the end. So there certainly are people who are part of the church body for a time and who, are going through the motions. They profess faith, they get baptized, they go through all this fun stuff. But then 5 years down the line, they're a Hindu, and everybody's just kind of like, what? Like, Hindu? Mm-hmm. Like, of all things, Hinduism, really? And that happens. And the way that we would explain that is that person was never elect. The final evidence had been that God had not chosen that person for salvation ahead of time, and he has left them in their sin. And though they seemed for a time to be, I think the imagery that the Bible uses is sheep or as wheat, actually turned out that they had been goats and that they had been weeds this entire time. And the proof of that was that they eventually fell away. So maybe that's how we would explain it.
Okay. And I can't remember exactly where it is, but there's we don't have to go through all of it because I'm sure you can come up with tons of it, but there is, from your standpoint, like solid biblical verses that speak directly to predestination. I know the one that always comes in everybody's head is where Paul's talking about that he knew you before you were ever born, and had already called the people to his glory or something. I can't remember exactly what it is, but that's the gist of it.
Mm-hmm.
So how does predestination tie into free will? Because I know free will is something that's so easily understood that we can just, hash it out in 30 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, super easy topic.
Nothing controversial about it at all.
Definitely. Yeah, so if I had to, so obviously the two extremes would be the libertarian free will, and I don't mean extreme in a negative sense. Libertarian free will, where we have the freedom to have done otherwise. So I ate a delicious breakfast this morning of wheat toast and 2 poached eggs, and it had like an avocado salsa. I sound pretty fancy. And
is that what you had for breakfast?
Oh, it's delicious.
I'm from the South, so I actually had a bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich this morning that I got up and cooked. So
that sounds pretty good.
Fancy over here.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm dieting, so I'm keeping the calories kind of low. But
my goal was to get up at 5 o'clock this morning and make pancakes for the family, but I decided to sleep in, and that didn't happen.
Well, I've got a 3-month-old, so I don't have the option of sleeping in right now. That's a few years down the line for me.
13 and 9, so I'm past all those days.
All right.
Anyway, deciding to do differently for breakfast.
Right. So could I have done otherwise? The libertarian perspective would say, yes, you have the ability to do otherwise. The determinist perspective would say, no, that was determined, obviously because of the name, and you couldn't have chosen to do otherwise. Stephen, that's funny. You couldn't have chosen to do otherwise because you're just hardwired to have chosen that. And I would go in the middle, and I think most Calvinists, most Reformed Christians would go in the middle too, and say that we're compatibilists. So we would affirm that our choices are determined, but we're still morally responsible for our actions. And there are some atheist philosophers who would hold to compatibilism too. Daniel Dennett comes to mind. There's a wide debate all over that, but yeah, I would be a compatibilist.
How would you be responsible for a choice you didn't have for a decision that you didn't have a choice on? I guess is where the big question would lead to.
Well, we would say that the fact that you chose it. So I did choose to make my breakfast that way this morning. Could I have chosen to make pancakes instead? I would say no, because I couldn't have chosen other than what I desire. So we would say that our desire determines what we're going to choose. We can't choose, we can't choose against our desires. And I guess I would ask my libertarian friends if the reason that I made the fancy breakfast with eggs and avocado salsa and that kind of thing, what was the cause? Like, why did I choose that? You can't say because you'd wanted to, because that's what the compatibilist believes. So why did I choose that? And if there's any cause to determine that, then you're not a libertarian free will person. You're a determinist to some degree, whether compatibilist or otherwise. If you say that, like, well, just every Thursday morning, that's what you eat. Okay, then it's the tradition and my desire to conform with tradition that determined why I chose the eggs and the salsa. And so the libertarian free will person kind of has to say that there's just no reason at all why you chose what you chose. There's no determining factors. It's just this choice that came out of nowhere that's uncaused by anything else, which is kind of a weird, mysterious explanation for why I chose my breakfast. It just seems like I chose my breakfast because that's what I wanted to eat, which is the compatibilist position. So Uh, yeah, never cooked them. Get in there, do it yourself, Stephen. Gosh, freeloading pancake eater. So
But him and I are always trading food pics with each other on Twitter. It's kind of
oh wow, okay, yeah, that's cool.
he got it one Sunday morning and was like, "Hey, he sent me a link to his church where there was like, here, watch our church service online." And I took a picture of like me like cooking pancakes. I was like, "Can't, busy making breakfast."
Mhm. That's funny. Oh goodness. So to circle back, so we would say that a person is responsible not because he could have done otherwise, but because he did what he wanted to do. So freedom is only you have the ability to do what you want to do, not that you have the ability to do otherwise. So if I wanted to eat waffles this morning, but my wife was like, "No, you can't. You cannot eat waffles. You have to lose weight, you fatso." And she tied me to the chair and started forcing the eggs down my throat. That wouldn't be my free choice. So I would have not been responsible for eating the eggs because I wasn't able to do what I wanted to do. I wasn't free. So maybe that's your answer. So we would say that freedom and moral responsibility comes because you did what you wanted to do. You acted upon your desires.
Sorry, I was typing to Math Pig in the chat. He asked, "What did he miss?" And Spartan Theology said that we solved world hunger, and I was saying that we found a solution to free will and solved and solved hunger. So I guess as far as that goes, but where would your desires come from? Like, you have a desire to go, like, we're use you for an example here. You have a desire at the moment to be on a diet.
Mhm.
Now we can expound on that, and you can say that there's outside pressures that are coming down on you to make you to want to conform to a certain into a certain box, so to speak. But then you have to ask, where are the desires of them coming from? And I think under that kind of point of view, it's all going to come back to this is what God has chosen for people to desire. Would it not?
Yeah, so our desires would be, I mean, even the naturalist would kind of fall into a similar thing. Like, where do your desires come from? And I mean, certainly we don't have control to, at least to a large extent. Usually, I mean, certainly you could say that you can transform your desire and that kind of thing, but for the most part, you can't control your desires. They're just part of your nature. And I think I would agree with that for the most part. You're not responsible for your desires for the most part. We could get into a little bit more the corporate fallenness of humanity and original sin and all that kind of stuff, which is where our bad desires come from. That's a little bit different of a topic.
Well,
So-
actually, if you don't mind, if I can kind of steer us actually in that direction, because then, like, even if you want to take it all back to, it comes back to the fall of man. Well, where did Eve's desire come from to listen to the snake in the garden, or serpent, however you want to look at it? I mean, that would have had to have come from somewhere. So she can't put it back on anybody else except for God at that point, correct? Because that's the only place that her desires could have come from.
Mm-hmm. So
this is just some of the issues that a lot of
a
lot of people on my side see with Calvinism, and I want to. I like to say this, that I want these to kind of be friendly conversations. I don't want you to feel like I'm trying to pin you in a corner or beat you up or anything. So,
yeah. So I was just looking up the traditional answer to this, and it's the one I would kind of hold to. Like, here's the Westminster Confession's explanation of that. So, God hath endued the will of man with that natural liberty that is neither forced nor by any absolute necessity of nature determined to do good or evil, and man, in his state of innocency, had freedom and power to will and do that which was good and well pleasing to God, but yet mutably so that he might fall from it. I just wanted to quote that because they said it better than probably I could. So my answer to that would be God created Adam and Eve with an upright nature, but not an immutable righteous nature. So they were free to do both good and evil, not the way that human beings are now, where we're much more bent towards sin and rebellion. But Adam and Eve were in an unstable state, you could say, where they could have gone either way. So we would say that Adam and Eve's choice, though predetermined by God, was free in a sense that our choices are not free. So that after the fall, now we have fallen into bondage to sin. Our natures have been warped or spoiled, I guess you could say. But Adam and Eve's choice was free, meaning that God didn't force them to do it. He didn't coerce them to do it. They freely chose to do it. So maybe that could be an answer to that kind of thing. So God didn't force Adam and Eve to do anything. They freely chose to do it without any coercion. So that's kind of where I would fall.
Okay. And I'm going to get this out of the way because it kind of popped in my head. So sorry to disappoint anybody that's watching the stream right now. I'm going to try my best to have a conversation on free will, determinism, and God's position in it without bringing up World War II, Holocaust. So we're going to, because that seems to be the one that a lot of people like to go to, like, well, then explain this under this position. And I think there's so many more nuances that you can get into without going to the extreme that there's no point in even bringing it up.
Well, I don't mind the Holocaust question. Like, I think it just, like, when I get a little disappointed if, like, someone with, like, fire in their eyes, just kind of like, oh yeah, well, your God predestined the Holocaust, like that kind of thing. But if you ask me, like, how do you understand God's predestination with, like, awful things like the Holocaust, I'm happy to answer that question. Well, I don't know if happy is the word, but I would gladly answer that question.
I just want to put it out there, chat. See, I freely chose to stay away from it, and he was determined to bring it up.
I had no choice. Sorry. Oh man.
So, I mean, if you believe that everything comes down to the desires of people, which I guess we ultimately track back to God in some way. Now, how we do that is, it's all theological. It's speculation. It goes back to there's part of God that is mystery. His ways are above our ways. I mean, whatever the easiest way is to explain it. I mean, I'm not pinned down to a certain answer to that. But if you believe that everything is determined in some way by desires of people, and those desires come from somewhere, what is the point of Calvinist apologetics? Because wouldn't it ultimately be up to God to save somebody, whether you're involved in it or not?
Yeah, we would say that God ordains the end result of a person's salvation, but we would also say that God ordains the means as well. So the means of salvation might be a YouTube video that I post or something like that, and that's a good thing that happens. So a couple answers would be, the means of salvation are still important. Is it possible that God could fail to somebody he desires to save? We would say certainly not. How could God fail to do anything he desires to do? Sounds like something's more powerful than God. But he will bring about, through means, the things that he desires. So whether the mean is a YouTube video or a debate or open air preaching or baptism or the Lord's Supper, whatever those things are, God uses all these means to give out his grace to people. And then the other thing that we would say is that we're commanded to do it. We're commanded to give a reasoned and respectful and gentle defense for our faith. So regardless of the end result of what you're doing, if someone asks you at work tomorrow, hey, Ross, you one of those Christian types? Hate those guys. Like, I'm commanded by God to give a response, regardless of whatever the outcome is. It's my duty out of obedience to preach the gospel and do that kind of stuff. So maybe that's a full answer to your question, hopefully.
Yeah, no, I mean that works. I mean, even so, basically, if I'm going to repeat what I heard on that, and like I said, this whole series that I'm trying to do here, that I'm starting off my channel with, is basically to get an understanding of other people's beliefs, because it's too easy on social media and YouTube and things like that to attack a straw man of somebody's beliefs and their positions. And I just kind of like to give people a chance to actually state what their beliefs are and what their positions are, and ask questions about it and have a dialogue about it to get that better understanding. And ultimately, I'm at like 20 subscribers right now, but hopefully, I mean, I look at, if a channel grows large enough, this could be a series playlist that's put together where people can go back and get an understanding later on down the road. So if I'm to understand you correctly, it's you are commanded through the Bible, which is the word of God to you, to go out and preach the gospel to all of mankind. Now, whether you preaching the gospel leads somebody to Jesus or opens somebody up to accept God, that is completely out of your hands, but you are doing what you are commanded to do. So it doesn't matter whether you save any souls or bring people to Christ or not. You're still holding up your end of the agreement. So you have nothing to worry about on that side.
Yeah, I think that's I would even go a little bit stronger. That's basically exactly what I said before. So, but I think if I was to amend my original answer, I would even go a little bit further and say that I've never actually, well, I don't know, but I've never actually been the sufficient cause for anyone's salvation, for anyone's repentance.
But you don't think you can be, though, correct?
Exactly. Yep. I can be the instrument that God uses, but an instrument, whether God will work through the instrument or not, I don't know. I don't have control over that, but my job is to be faithful and obedient and that kind of thing, and glorify God no matter what, which is actually, to tell you the truth, really great. I don't have to fall asleep at night, wondering like, what if I said this better? What if I like phrase this a little bit differently? Like maybe someone's soul hangs in the balance over my words. I sleep like a baby at night. Actually, my baby sleeps really well, so we sleep about as well as each other at night, because I can rest in the fact that God will perfectly save all who He desires. So it's not up to me, definitely.
Okay. All right. Had somewhere else to go with that. I kind of want to. So, I guess as far as the free will and determination thing go, if there's a car accident, like just, and this is just me just trying to get an understanding of this. So, if there's a car accident and it's an accident so that it was there was no desire behind it. So I'm trying to take the desire out of it. And somebody dies in a car accident. Now, could you say that because there was no desire involved that person is responsible for it? Or would you have to look at it as, well, that's just how God decreed it to happen, so there's nothing that person could have done differently? Or would you trace the desires back to they desired to get in the car that morning to go to work at that specific time? Or
yeah, I guess there would be like two different kinds of car accidents. Like one could be caused, like if a guy was drunk and he slammed into the slammed into the back of your car. That would be one thing. We would say that the person is responsible, the drunk person, because that's where desire would come in. But let's just say like you're just driving to work and I don't know, you run over a nail or something like that, and your tire pops and you slam into a tree or something like that. So yeah, we would say that was something that God determined. It's not your fault, certainly. Like it's not your fault that you ran over a tire, a rock or something like that, and wrecked your car. So yeah, we would put that. If I, as a Christian, and practically, I would, when something like that happens, I would wonder why God has allowed this to happen, why this is part of His plan. But I would assume it is. And maybe an even better example would be, something like a natural disaster or something like that. So we don't always know in the time, like in the immediate time, why God has allowed certain things to happen. But we do believe, and Scripture assures us, that there is a reason and a cause for whatever afflictions that we're experiencing. A good example might be, we're all thinking about the COVID thing going on right now, and I have no idea. Way too complicated, way above my pay grade. But going back a little bit further, we could look at something like the bubonic plague. Bubonic plague there were a bunch of instances of the bubonic plague, but the big one, I think in the mid 1300s, that went from about 3 years, killed. When I was in school, it was like a third to half of all the people in Europe, and now the things I've been reading, that's a low estimate, probably 2/3, and in cities probably as high as 75% of all the people. And you look at something like that, like that's devastating. Like we are, like right now, we're crushed by a virus that kills less than 1% of the people who get it. And that virus was at a 75% kill rate. And you look at something like that, like how could this happen? Like how could there possibly be any good behind that? Well, actually, there were a lot of good things that came about from the bubonic plague. There were, with the less amount of people, there rose a middle class. Certainly labor is more valuable and that kind of thing. And with less people around, and especially people going off and dying in crusades, a middle class evolves that eventually starts things like the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and then the Reformation. So without the bubonic plague, we probably wouldn't be here on our awesome computers talking to one another. So the bubonic plague in 3 years was a crucial example, a crucial puzzle piece for the prosperity and all the awesome technology that you and I are using right now.
Okay. So I kind of want to get off the free will subject for a minute. Well, it's not going to be completely off of free will. The way that I understand the Calvinist situation is there are different levels to the decrees of God, that not everything that God does is, it wasn't, you're going to get up this morning and you're going to do this live stream. Like there's different like groupings to it, I guess you could say. Would that be a correct assessment?
So Luther would have talked like that. Luther would have said that there are different levels of freedom. There are things below us and things above us. So like we're not free to, just your average person isn't free to repent and believe and that kind of thing. But he is free to decide what kind of shoes he wants to wear today, or like what, does he want to take the long way or the short way to work or something like that. I would probably go even more towards the the seemingly absurd position on that God does predetermine everything. So even the mundane choices they're part of God's decree. And I would find scriptural evidence for that, to tell you the truth. I think that mundane choices they're part of God's decree. I would find.
Oops, sorry. Yeah,
that's okay. Yeah, so I would say that each and everything that happens is under God's eternal decree. Though there are different levels of the decree, I think. So God's decree a perfect example would be God's decree to save someone, and his decision to save someone is not like his decree to leave someone in their sin. So the predestination of salvation and the predestination of damnation are not the same kind of thing. The one is active and the other is passive. So God is actively doing something. He's deciding to actively do something in bringing someone like me from spiritual death to spiritual life. But in his decree to pass over someone else, to not pardon them, it's a passive thing. So he's just saying, I'm not going to intervene here. I'm just going to let it go the way that it is. So he decrees things actively and passively through means and all that kind of stuff. So there is some complexity to different kinds of decrees. So yeah, I would affirm what you're saying, but not the same way Luther would.
Okay. So as far as from your understanding and the way that you see the theology, do the angels have to follow the same decrees? Would they fall under the same decrees of God?
Yes, meaning they're so like the only person who we would say has autonomous free will is God. We would say that human beings and angels don't have that kind of autonomous free will that God has. They have creaturely free will, the compatibilist kind of free will, that they act according to their desires, but they couldn't have done otherwise. So, but the decrees for angels are not like the decrees for human beings. Like Jesus didn't die to save any angel or anything like that. If an angel falls, he falls. There's no option for repentance and that kind of thing. I wouldn't want to get too far into the angelology sort of stuff, because I don't think Scripture says a ton about angels. I think most of what is common knowledge about angels would be more from tradition and superstition and all that kind of stuff. So, but
So would I mean that was a setup for a follow-up question, and I guess you can kind of see where this is gonna head. Does Satan have that free will, or was it determined from the start that that's where this path was going to go?
Yeah, so I would say that he had the same kind of free will that you or I have. So yeah, maybe that's a good way. So Satan wasn't forced to do that. He wasn't coerced to tempt Eve, that kind of thing. So he freely chose to do that. He was not coerced to do that, and yet the fall was part of God's decree. Yeah, so God wasn't surprised when humanity fell in Adam. Certainly he wasn't surprised by that. He knew it was going to happen, allowed it to happen. It was part of his plan for it to happen. I think the Bible's pretty clear on that. So yeah, that's kind of how I would answer that. So Satan, Adam, and Eve are all responsible for their choices. They weren't forced to choose to do what they did, and yet it was still within the eternal decree of God.
Okay. Trying to see where I want to go next. I do have a couple questions from the chat. We'll get to more later on. This is the way it kind of worked last week. This is only my second time doing these things, and a lot of times things pop in your head and then pop out, and kind of do a lot of it on the go. Spartan Theology had a question earlier. He said, how can God elect people based on no conditions? It seems impossible that God could know someone without knowing what they would do if God has foreknowledge. He said he can expand on the question if it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, so
it doesn't make sense to me. Maybe he's from my understanding with Spartan is he's not a Reformed Calvinist, but actually attends a Reformed church.
Ooh,
so he actually, I like him here because I was like, you seem to have a pretty good understanding of some of these views.
So I think I saw it in the chat before. So right. So the conditions. I mean, there are a bunch of things. So I would say certainly God doesn't elect people based on conditions. The issue with that question would be, I think it assumes the order of decree versus foreknowledge. So in the more Arminian or, not everybody who rejects Calvinism is Arminian, but in the Arminian sense, God elects based on his foreknowledge. So he looks to see what happens. My question would be that foreknowledge, right? That when God looks down the corridors of time, why is the corridor of time the way it is? Okay, if you're going to think of it in more of the, the Einsteinian kind of thinking that there's, just think of like a log of time, right? That everything that has ever happened is in this determined log, and you slice it, and there's a 2D slice, and that's what we're experiencing right now. That log of time, if you want to put it that way, why is it the way it is? So, and when God looks at it, why is it the way it is? I would say that God has chosen to make it that way, but it almost sounds, if you're an Arminian, that that log exists independent. The way it exists is independent of God's decree. So when God looks at, oh, I wonder what JB and Ross are going to do on August 27th, 2020, it almost sounds like you're saying he's learning something, that he looks about the conditions and that kind of thing. So that doesn't, if you're an Orthodox Christian, the fact that God learns something, makes you very uncomfortable. Yeah, that whole like omniscient thing is something we like to think about. So I would say that God's foreknowledge is based on his decree. It's based on his eternal decree. And I think that's a lot more consistent. And then the second part, it seems impossible that God could know someone without knowing what they would do if God has foreknowledge. So trying to understand the question. It seems impossible that God could know someone without knowing what they would do. Well, if you hold to a libertarian free will perspective, how can God know what they would do? Because would do seems like that if you put person A into scenario B, there's going to be one thing that they would do. But if you hold to a libertarian perspective, that there is no cause to your actions, you just choose ex nihilo, right? You don't choose because you are determined by your desires, you're determined by your background or your experience or anything like that, then how can God know? Like what are the criteria that God is using to know what you would do beforehand? So I think actually the what he would do in this circumstance implies compatibilism, which is what I'm arguing for. So hopefully, Spartan Theology, that answers your question. I think it was a good question.
Okay, and Stephen Steen, terrible guy. He had a question, and he wanted to, I'll put it up on the screen here in case you want to be able to read it. Why does God's predetermined past for our lives change his mind? Examples would be Jonah's ministry, Noah, and etc.
I see. Yeah. I think he's just probably asking about the passages in the Bible that say God changed his mind, or he was going to do this, but then he stopped doing this. Like Noah's flood, or Moses's intercessory prayer to God and that kind of thing. We would look at those things and say that I think most Christians would look at those kind of thing, unless you're like an open theist or something like that. We would say that that's anthropomorphic language, the same kind of language that's used to say that God has eyes or hands or wings, or he's like a hen with his chicks under his feathers and that kind of thing. We wouldn't say that those are literal descriptions of the process that God is using to interact with people or anything like that. We say that that's anthropomorphic language, that God didn't really change his mind. Because even if you're an Arminian, you can't believe that God has changed his mind at any point, that he's been like, I didn't think about that. Thanks for bringing that up to me, Moses. I'm so glad sometimes I just get so heated and bothered. Thanks for calming me down, Moses.
Doesn't it say that God has changed his mind?
Yeah, so we would say that that's anthropomorphic language, the same as God having feathers and eyeballs and hands.
Okay. But so I guess you would also say that it's just the language as far as like where God supposedly regrets making man. I mean, what he says around Noah, is that what it is? I'm trying to picture exactly what it is. He's like, I regret, having created these people. So, I mean, can you really regret something if you knew that that's where it was going to go? Yeah,
we wouldn't actually say that God experiences regret or anything like that. Someone probably more of an open theist. An open theist would be someone that God doesn't know the future. That's what an open theist believe in. Even the like neo-Orthodox, Karl Barth, Paul Tillich kind of people, they would also, they would reject divine simplicity and that God does really change his mind. But an Orthodox Christian would never, they would say that that's, Stephen, he's a troll, and I move he be banned from Twitter. I don't know if I'm going to second that.
No, from YouTube.
Oh, wow. Man. Wow, that's harsh. So, yeah.
This was Steven's response.
Oh, man. Jeez. Who knew the pancake thing is just the tip of the iceberg? Oh,
Steven's a flat earther. Breaking news here.
Oh, my.
Nice. So one question I had earlier that kind of escaped my mind: would your theology encompass all Christians, or would your denomination encompass only Calvinists and everything else is blasphemy against the Spirit? Or how would you hold to that?
So technically, I'm part of the Southern Baptist denomination, which isn't specific. It isn't only Reformed Christians. The Baptist Faith Message 2000 kind of leaves that open. It leaves it open to more Arminian kind of Christians or the Provisionist kind of Christians. So the denomination that I'm part of right now would open people who are not Calvinists, certainly. More other denominations, though, like Reformed Baptist or Presbyterian, the PCA or OPC, things like that, they're not saying that people who don't agree on all 5 points of the TULIP acronym are not actual Christians. People who would talk like that, we would call them hyper-Calvinists. Very, very unpleasant people, hyper-Calvinists. They're also the kind of people who would say that you shouldn't go evangelize or send missionaries to other countries or post YouTube channels or YouTube videos on your channel or anything like that because, what's the point? What's the point of doing any of that kind of stuff? So we would reject hyper-Calvinism. So I think that there are plenty of people like Spartan Theology. I'm happy to affirm as a brother in Christ and all that kind of stuff. So you don't have to be a Calvinist to be a Christian or, to share fellowship at my church or anything like that.
Can you be a Mormon?
No, so Mormon, that would be a different thing, yeah.
Or Catholic.
So Catholic is a little bit more tricky. Mormonism I would reject because they don't have the same God. Mormons are the most polytheistic religion ever created. They literally believe in an infinite number of gods. Elohim and Heavenly Mother used to be human beings on a different planet with their own God who they worshipped, and they went through the same process that we can go through now, and we can become gods of our own planets and have our own spirit children, and the process goes on and on and on and on, literally an infinite number of gods. So the issue with Mormonism is they don't have the same God. Like, just very clearly, Islam is closer to Christianity than Mormonism is. With Catholicism, I certainly wouldn't say that there are no Roman Catholics who are, I think, generally converted or regenerate or anything like that. There are significant and severe differences, and I think oftentimes Rome's doctrine gets in the way of the gospel with things like purgatory and indulgences and things like that that really make, I think, salvation dependent on your works and your effort. That God's grace isn't sufficient for salvation. So I would say that there are serious issues, but I certainly wouldn't consign all Roman Catholics to apostasy or anything like that.
So how about, this was an interesting concept that I had never heard before, was last week speaking with Caleb, he actually said that there's I'm trying to think, is it catechism? Is that the word for like the Catholic teachings? That, and it's actually in the comments of my video that I did with him, that there's actual teachings in the Catholic Church that atheists can actually be saved.
Yeah.
Please talk amongst yourself.
So I watched the conversation that you had. I can't remember if it was last week or the week before. And I think, just a side note, I think you really did accomplish what you set out to do. It was a great conversation. I learned a lot from just listening to that. So it was really helpful. And I'm happy to recommend your channel to people on my social media. I thought it was really good. So
thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely, man. So I think that's a development in theology that I think is directly contradictory to earlier Roman Catholic teaching. So Vatican II was the council in I can't remember if it was the 60s or the 70s, where I think the influence of theological liberalism in Roman Catholicism was, uh, you know, became a real and serious thing. The people at the Council of Trent, that was the council in the 1530s, 1540s that condemned the Reformation. Nobody at that council who said that unless you believe in purgatory, you cannot be saved, right? Unless you believe in all of the Marian dogmas, you cannot be saved, all that kind of stuff. Nobody at that council could have imagined that an atheist or a Muslim could have been saved. No pope during that time period could have imagined that Vatican II would eventually be the position of the church. So I think from church tradition, from scripture, the conclusions of Vatican II that Muslims and atheists can be saved, I think is like kind of crazy.
Is it now? Would you consider that one of the things that you were discussing just a minute ago, where you said that you believe there are some traditions in Rome that kind of get in the way of the actual Bible message? Would that be one of them, where you kind of think there are teachings of the church that Catholics hold to that kind of don't square right with the Bible?
I think that probably would be a good example. I don't know if it does in the same kind of way that purgatory or indulgences do, where like it makes it up to like purgatory and indulgences gets in the way of the gospel, and that it makes it not by faith but by your actions, by you getting rid of your temporal sin by visiting this church or by praying or giving money to the church or something like that. But in the same kind of way, Pope Francis has said a bunch of times that we shouldn't go and proselytize. Like we shouldn't go and try and convince an atheist or a Muslim that they should become a Christian. Like, that's a bad thing. You should just, by your actions, you should demonstrate Jesus, but you should never, use your words to try and convince someone to be a Christian. I mean, that certainly gets in the way of the gospel and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's a very problematic church teaching that comes out of theological liberalism, not church tradition or scripture or anything like that. So yeah, I think that would be a good example. Now, am I willing to say that anybody who believes that, like, am I willing to say that Caleb, is going to hell or anything like that? I wouldn't imagine to make those kind of determinations. I'm very underqualified for that job. So I would have strong disagreements with Caleb, and we can have a lot of more debates on that kind of thing. But I'm not willing to say that someone who believes that can't be saved in the same way I'm willing to believe that a Mormon can't possibly be saved.
Okay. The toughest question, and this is one that I asked Caleb, I'm going to ask every guest this, Christian or not, because one of the other things that I want to do is not only denominations of Christianity, but I want to go into the other religions too. If I can find a Muslim that I can get along with, I'd like to have them on and have the discussion with them. If I would like to have someone from Judaism on to have the discussion with them. I've got a polytheist already lined up to have a conversation with her. So, like I said, I'm trying to branch this out as a large understanding series that I'm going to be doing. And I was going somewhere with that and forgot where it was. Oh, yeah, the question that I'm going to ask everybody, because I kind of want to get everybody's position on it, because it's one of the things that gets talked about so much in this area between different beliefs. Jesus, liar, Lord, or lunatic? Where do you put him?
I'm going to go with Lord, although
okay.
Bart Ehrman would even put a fourth L in there, legend.
Legend?
Yeah, so the C.S. Lewis triad should, I think it should probably be what is it? The quad form of triad. A quad?
Quadad?
I don't know.
yeah. We'll just go with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's all I really got for you. We've been going for just over an hour. Gonna do any more questions from the chat?
I think I saw one.
Not Spartan Theology. London Theist had one, and he wants to know some book recommendations for Calvinism.
Probably my favorite one is so
Trying to find
actually
it. Here you go. Let me throw it up on the screen.
from the other side. So when I became a Calvinist, so I didn't start out as a Calvinist. I struggled with this issue for probably about a year, trying to figure out, should I be an Arminian? Should I be a Provisionist? Should I be a Calvinist? The first book I read was Chosen but Free by Norman Geisler. And that was arguing what he called the moderate Calvinist position, but it was thoroughgoing provisionism, Arminianism, that sort of thing. And by the time I got done with the book, I was like, I think I'm a Calvinist. I think I just heard the best argument for the other side, and I see so many problems with this. I think I'm a Calvinist now. So I would recommend Norman Geisler's Chosen but Free, because that convinced me, even though he's not a Calvinist, not arguing for Calvinism. But then the other position or other books would be a response to Chosen but Free is James White's Potter's Freedom. Very good, very helpful book. I definitely recommend that. And R.C. Sproul has a book called Chosen by God, which is very helpful. It's a little bit shorter, definitely easier to read than a lot of books. It's certainly at the popular level. J.I. Packer has some great stuff on that. If you want to dig real deep, you can always get into the institutes, Calvin's institutes, and go old school, that kind of thing. And even if you want to go more old school than that, Thomas Aquinas and Augustine have some great stuff that you could look up for free, I'm sure. But yeah, the two books that I would definitely recommend to get the best handle on this, read Chosen but Free by Norman Geisler, and then The Potter's Freedom by James White. Those would be the two best ones from either side of evangelical, debate on that kind of thing.
Okay. Spartan Theology had a question for you. I kind of threw it up on the screen so you could keep the name. Have you read Jerry Wall's book, Why I'm Not a Calvinist?
No, I'm sorry. I have not read that.
All right. So that's a big no to you, Spartan.
Sorry. I saw someone ask on there, what do I think about Karl Barth's view of election? Spartan asked at 10.
I didn't see that. I'm sorry about
that. Yes, what does Ross think of Karl Barth and his view on election? So I've been trying to get. Yeah.
Hold on a second. I've got to handle this chat. Spartan, that's way too early for questions. We do questions at the end. They get lost if you send them in the beginning.
Yeah, it was right after the pancake thing.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna throw it up on the screen for you.
Thanks. So I'm definitely not an expert on Karl Barth. I've tried to understand his his position. So Karl Barth, for those who don't know, Karl Barth was a very influential theologian in the earlier part of the 20th century. I guess you could call him, I don't know if he's the founder, but he's a big part of the neo-Orthodox tradition within Christianity. So to me, it's kind of a synthesis between like Kant's philosophy and Protestantism and evangelical orthodoxy. So I think there are a lot of problems with Karl Barth's views. I really appreciate Karl Barth as a human being. He was one of the leading voices in the time of Nazi Germany, standing up to the Nazis and, flipping them the Christian middle finger, proverbially. And so I really like Karl Barth as a person. His theology I find a little confusing. I haven't worked it all out yet. And I'm definitely, I don't know if I could give an opinion on his view on election. I think it's definitely doesn't really have anything to do with, it's not in the tradition of Calvin or Luther or anything like that, which I think he tries to make it that way. So sorry I can't give you a full answer on Barth and his view on predestination, but yeah, sorry, Spartan.
What would you suggest as far as some books, articles, anything like that as far as arguments against Calvinism? Because again, like I said, I'm trying to widen the scope and bring in the dialogue. So that's
So I would definitely suggest. I think I mentioned it before. The Chosen but Free by Norman Geisler. That was the first book I read when I was going into all this, and but I did say that when I put the book down, I was like, I think I'm a Calvinist now. So I don't know if that's the best book to hear the other side. Leighton Flowers has a YouTube channel called Soteriology 101, which adopts the provisionist perspective. I'm not a huge Leighton Flowers fan. He seems like a nice guy, but man, I don't know. Most Calvinists find him really annoying. So a good book or article, man, I don't know. Well, John Lennox just came out with a book on the issue, which I think is very flawed, but he's a brilliant guy. To be honest with you, I've just come across a lot of bad responses to Calvinism. So I don't.
That's perfectly fine. So last call for questions. Any more questions from the chat? I think I have a whopping 4 people watching. So that's I've got 3, it looks like. And I'm one of them. So that's always a plus.
If you can get Rob Bell, that'd be pretty cool. Just
quick story. When I was going to church, I was raised in a Methodist church.
Mm-hmm.
And stopped going for a while. And when we started going back just before I got married, because my wife wanted to get married at a church, and she wanted it to be a church that we actually belonged to. She didn't want to just do a run of the mill church that she had no ties to. So we started going back to church, and we were getting involved with our Sunday school class and stuff. And they used to do the Rob Bell video series. We used to do those in class. And this was before his Universalist book came out. And
I think I got it right there. It's on my heresy shelf. Joel Osteen, I got the Quran and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, he's on my heresy.
And I'm under no false illusions that I'm going to get Rob Bell on the channel, but I figured, what's the harm in sending him an email? Mm-hmm. Because as far as that, when he came out with that book and started discussing universalism, that was the biggest fallout I've ever seen a preacher go through. He went from a mega rock star preacher to people are just writing him out of the church completely.
Well, yeah, he definitely kind of spun theologically, out of control there for a while. He sounded like he was a big proponent of missiology and the oh gosh, what's the name of that movement? I can't remember it, but it was a huge thing in the 90s. Yeah, of the Emergent Church. Yeah, he was a big name in the Emergent Church, and then he was all of a sudden he was like, yeah, something I think I kind of agree with the source critics on the Old Testament. It's just this badly edited combination of different myths, and everybody's like, wait, what? And you're a universalist? Oh wow.
Yeah, he took a turn as far as his popularity went. I mean, he went from, I saw pictures of the guy's church. He was legitimately a mega church preacher, and he seemed, and granted, this is just from the stuff that he put out. He didn't seem to be as bad as far as a Joel Osteen goes, as far as pushing the give me money, make me rich, kind of thing. He seemed to be, hey, I'm just preaching, and if 10,000 people want to show up to watch me preach, then tell them to come on. We're doing this for them.
Yeah, I don't think he wasn't. He doesn't perturb me the same way Joel Osteen does. Yeah, I agree.
So, but yeah, like I said, I'm that's That's the two big names that I've got planned. There's two big names that I've got planned that I'm gonna send emails to try to get on. Is I'm gonna try to get Rob Bell to come on for Universalism, and I'm under no illusion that I'm gonna get either one of these. And then my second one is I'm going to send out an email to Rabbi Tovia Singer to have him come on and discuss Judaism.
Oh, that'd be kind of cool.
He's got some. There's some people in the atheist community that have connections with Tovia Singer, so I'm gonna try to see if I can't talk to some people. And
I wonder if you could get. You might be able to. Do you know who Michael Brown is?
yeah,
I think you could probably get Michael Brown to represent like the Pentecostal kind of side. I think he would do it.
Is he a Pentecostal?
As long as we're, I mean, Michael Brown is a pretty common name, but the big giant Jewish guy with the awesome mustache. The Line of Fire. Yep, yeah, he's Pentecostal. He would be a great interview. I think he would probably do it. He's a cool guy.
Yeah, I've also got many problems with him though.
Oh,
I don't know.
Okay.
He's following on Twitter is all I'm going to say.
Yeah,
it's pretty bad. Although I have watched some of his interviews and discussions and stuff. I watched an interview. It wasn't an interview. It was a non-structured debate between him and Tovia Singer on Isaiah, the suffering servants in Isaiah.
Oh, interesting.
And it was it went over my head because 90% of it was Jewish words.
Right.
Or was Hebrew, and I was like, I don't understand that.
Yeah, they're both way out of my league in terms of Hebrew too. Yeah.
And it was and that's when I first found out who Dr. Brown was, and then I've watched him a couple of times on some things, and he was on Modern Day Debate with Dr. Josh from Digital Hammurabi. They did a thing on there on biblical slavery in the Old Testament. And I watched the interview that he did on Capturing Christianity's channel. He had one on there. And I think the answer that he gave to a question, which was a question that I had going through my head, and he gave the answer to it that I actually liked. And I'm not going to say it exactly how he said it, but there's the passage in the Old Testament about the prince coming and offering a ram sacrifice at the third temple for the sins of himself and stuff, and for the sins of himself and of Israel. And somebody asked the question, is this discussing the future Messiah? And he said, well, we don't know. He was like, but if it is, then we're wrong. And I was like, okay, I guess that was pretty honest. He's like, I don't think it is, but if it is, then I'm wrong. I was like,
yeah,
all right.
Yeah, I like Michael Brown. But,
yeah, he's okay. He's got some crazy views on Twitter, but I'm not sure how much of. Yeah, politically and everything. Like he's big on talking about the spirit of Jezebel going through America and corrupting people. But I don't know. I don't agree with it, but I guess it's his theology, and I guess this is all about an understanding. So I should look past that to have the understanding of. I'll do a 2-hour Zoom chat with people that know Hebrew and stuff, and before I ever I'll bring Michael Brown on and be ready for him and understand what he's talking about. Yeah,
I've taken a couple years of Hebrew, but I haven't done a PhD in the subject, so I don't think I'm fit for the Zoom call.
Yeah, no, I haven't studied Hebrew at all. That's something that I really want to look into, and that was, whenever I started leaving Christianity, that was one of the things that I did was I went back and started reading the Old Testament and doing more of the Old Testament, because the way I always looked at it was you can't understand the new if you don't understand the old. And you don't, like, Britain controlled Australia at one point in time. So if you wanted to learn the history of Britain, you would go to England. You wouldn't go to Australia. You know what I mean? And that's kind of if you want to learn a history of the Bible, you don't go to the Gospels and Paul. You have to go back to the Old Testament, because it was one of the things that Tobias Singer said that I kind of like, or whatever, is there's three possibilities. Either the entire Bible is wrong, the entire Bible is right, or the Old Testament is right and the New Testament is wrong. You can't have a correct New Testament with with a wrong Old Testament. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way of putting it.
So, and that's kind of, the Old Testament is kind of where I've spent most of my stuff when I look into things and try to get a better understanding of. And I want to learn Hebrew. I just don't even know where to go to even start that.
Yeah. So the grammar that I used, of course, I did it in seminary, but Beginning Biblical Hebrew by Mark D. Furtado. It was, like, I think it was a helpful grammar, not expensive either. So I think it was pretty good. And, I used it, went through it. And I mean, now I can translate. It'll take me a while, but like I can translate any passage out of the Old Testament. I need a lexicon, obviously, but yeah, certainly. So it's certainly possible. And there are resources on the internet to help you with that, but dang, it's a huge commitment, and the follow through. That's the thing, man.
Yeah, it is. And that's one of the things that I've, had issues with doing, is just, it's a lot. And I know they're still doing it, but Dr. Bowen actually taught Hebrew in college, and he's going through and doing a whole thing of teaching biblical Hebrew on his channel and putting it all in a playlist. And I've watched like the first 2 episodes, and then I've caught some of the other ones that he's done, but he's to the point now where I can't even keep up with what he's doing. I've got to go back and just watch the whole thing from the beginning. So
yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, we've been going for an hour and 22 minutes, it looks like. I'm going to try to go ahead and end this stream. I'm going to let you give the last word. Say whatever you want. Hopefully it's nice. Well, I'm not monetized right now, so, I mean, whatever.
Yeah, me neither. So anything goes. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I really appreciate you having me on. I really like the model that you have so far for your channel. I think it, it's really helpful. And I don't think that there are a lot of people doing that. So especially not from, well, I don't want to say especially not, but I haven't seen it as much from the atheist side of things. So I really appreciate it. And you are definitely an honest interlocutor, like you mentioned last week with Caleb. So I'm looking forward to the next one you do. I'd like to have you on my channel, kind of do the same sort of thing. Like I would love to interview to see why you, left the Christian faith and that kind of thing. Not a debate kind of thing, but just kind of understanding your story a little bit more. So if you'd be interested,
sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, not a problem. We'll get together and work something out. I just started following you on Twitter today, which is kind of odd. You've been following me for a while, and I'm not sure exactly how I came across your radar. But
yeah, I think it was probably just in like the suggestion. Like if you follow, I don't know, Shannon Q, then sometimes like JB will pop up, and I'll look at your stuff and be like, oh yeah, I disagree with that guy. I'll follow him.
Yeah, and I want to say the first thing I saw you on was a debate on whether or not you should proselytize to indigenous people on Modern Day Debate. And then it took me a minute to place the guy on that Twitter account with the guy that was on that. But, and like I said, it popped up today. It was like, do you want to follow? It was like a suggestion to follow. And I said, you know what? I said, he's coming on my channel. I said, I haven't followed him yet. I said, I don't see you in many conversations, which is, usually where I pick my people to follow. But
yeah, I'll jump in them sometimes, but not too often.
But yeah, I put out a tweet, about a month ago that was like, hey, I'm looking for this, and this. And you, hey, Reformed Baptist here. I was like, okay. So, yeah. I mean, like I said, you were the first one to step up, and I was like, let's go for it. I wanted somebody other than Cy.
Yeah. Yeah, he'll definitely come on too, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, I'm not against having him on. I want to get my feet under me better before
you go the side and brood route. Yeah, I understand.
Before I get into the dog sleeps under the west, therefore Mudge.
Yeah.
So.
Oh man. Yeah, good old Cy. But yeah, JB, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And you can hopefully it worked because I'm still figuring this YouTube stuff out, but I think I have a link to your Twitter page in the description of the video. I'm going to add your YouTube channel to the description after we get done with the stream. I forgot to do it beforehand. Hey, you're doing better than Caleb. At least I had your Twitter in there to begin with. I didn't have Caleb's on there.
I appreciate that.
So, yeah, feel free to just let everybody know where to find you and what you're doing and stuff. And
yeah, definitely. So Bird's Eye View is a YouTube channel. I've been doing Dallas Wade recently put out a 10 questions for Christians kind of thing. Some of them are really interesting and difficult questions. So I've kind of broken it up over a few videos. So hopefully sometime later this week, if I can get all my seminary work done, I'll have the next video. So definitely check that out. More of the response video to Dallas Wade. And yeah, definitely check out my YouTube channel, Bird's Eye View. You can follow me at Twitter. I love disagreeing with people on things. So it's always fun. Yeah, so definitely check it out. And subscribe to JB's channel if you haven't already, because this is good stuff. And Shannon Q is definitely not the worst. I disagree with that.
She is.
Oh, she is the worst? Never mind. Okay. I'm open to changing my mind, you know.
All right. You can stick around for a second. I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast. It'll kick us into a studio room afterwards. All right. I want to thank everybody for watching the channel. Please subscribe, like the video, share it out if you enjoyed it. If you didn't enjoy it, then dislike it and unsubscribe if you're already subscribed. And we're going to try to keep some more of these going. Hopefully the next one I'm going to have is going to be next week with polytheist Callan. So I haven't exactly set up times with her yet, so we have to do that and see whether or not we can make it work, but that's looking to be the next one that I'm going to do. So stay tuned and we'll let you know. And thanks for joining us. Bye.